recently on May 9th, 2023, we had a discussion with Oncologic Drug Advisory Committee, which advises Food and Drug Administration about the drug approval, to discuss the results of the study POLARIX, which compared polatuzumab vedotin plus R-CHP or CHP versus R-CHP. This is the first study in diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in a long time, which showed actually a difference in progression-free survival. The study was previously reviewed by several outside agencies of US and was endorsed, and it is still not approved in US. So this combination is not approved in US as a standard therapy. So for folks not familiar with how FDA process works, like with advisory committee, and the role of the committee is to basically review the data which is presented by the sponsor, and then review the FDA position and some of the concerns which agency may have about the study itself, maybe the study data or the study conduct. And then there's a group of advisors who are discussing and dissecting the study and making recommendations to the agency if the combination should or should not be approved, and what are the other concerns about the study. So this was a half a day, very dynamic discussion about this study. And that's a study which is quite visible to our lymphoma community and with the high expectations in terms of the impact on the frontline therapy. So a couple of points which the committee discussed, and now it's all public, so we can actually discuss it openly. And if somebody would like to see the whole recording, I will refer you to FDA website where you can actually see the whole recording of the meeting. But several topics were brought up by FDA. The primary concern about the POLARIX study was that there was no overall survival difference between the arms. So there was a benefit in terms of the progression-free survival at 2 years. This was a fairly small difference between the outcome of patients, about 6.4% in progression-free survival. But overall survival was not different. So the big question is this relatively modest impact on overall survival or on a progression-free survival, but no impact on overall survival worth the toxicity? And is the risk to benefit ratio for this drug favorable? Along with this, there are some other concerns brought up. Number one, there was some heterogeneity of the patients on the study. So the study actually did not have a central pathology review. Central pathology review was applied to correlative biomarkers like FISH and some others, but not to actual confirmation of pathological diagnosis. And we all know that in lymphoma, there could be some disagreement between the pathologists, and there was a question from the agency how this heterogeneity impact the results of the study. And because high-grade lymphoma patients were allowed on the study, how this population actually could have affected the results of the study. And finally, there were some issues regarding the toxicity itself. And although overall the study results didn't show major increase in toxicity, there was some concern that maybe potential for neutropenia was higher with this more intensive combination. So to address those questions one by one, looking at the benefit, the members around the table were kind of divided. There was a long discussion regarding how much gain in progression-free survival was clinically meaningful. Myself and some of the other committee members felt that this was meaningful because it spurred patients additional therapies later on, which are potentially toxic, although we did acknowledge that this did not impact on overall survival in this study. In terms of the heterogeneity of the patients, there were some members of the committee which felt pretty strongly that the lack of central pathology review was not acceptable in a modern study, and it should be done for the verification of diagnosis. Some of the other members, including myself, took more pragmatic approach that in a real world, we wouldn't necessarily always be verifying diagnosis centrally, right, for the general use. So, and there's always some variability in the pathology interpretation, even between the experts. So to be more pragmatic, I actually felt that this was something which was more inclusive for the patients and more closer to the real world. But again, I know people have different opinions about it. For the third aspect of toxicity, yes, although there was some higher potential of toxicity, overall the top results in the study didn't show it, and there was no detriment in overall survival for the patients receiving the combination. One of the subset analyses done by agency was very interesting. They looked specifically at patients with diffuse B-cell lymphoma NOS, and this was analysis done by FDA, so they removed those high-grade lymphoma patients from this analysis, and it showed that there was no difference in overall survival, but there was some detriment maybe to the survival early on. Later on, the curves have emerged. But again, this was a subset analysis of and not a primary analysis in the study. So for a lot of the members, this was not necessarily the decisive factor in looking at the risk to benefit ratio of this drug. So overall, at the end, the majority of the committee members voted for the approval of the drug and recommendation for the approval. Again, in US system, it's a FDA independent decision. So the committee can make a recommendation, but the FDA has a lot of other factors to consider before they would make its decision. And it's not binding to FDA in any way. This was not a uniform decision. There were some committee members which disagreed. And again, I would refer you to the exact minutes from the meeting, and you can actually see how people voted. I can tell you that I voted yes, but it was not an easy and straightforward decision. And in my personal comments, after voting, you usually comment if you supported why and what are your concerns. I said I voted yes, but I would consider this regimen to be an option rather than a new standard. So, R-CHP became a standard based on improvement of both progression-free survival and overall survival in 3 independent studies, as FDA very nicely showed at the beginning. So it's really a standard which is well-rounded on a good foundation of improving the progression-free survival, but also overall survival. This was not seen in POLARIX study. We had this benefit in progression-free survival, but not the benefit in overall survival. I don't think with additional maturation of the study, it will be likely that we're going to see this difference because the separation of the progression-free survival curve occur late. So for me, this is more of an option, and I endorse it, but seen again as an option, but not a new standard. So it is not wrong still to treat patients with R-CHP, and this will come straight to patient and the center preference. And it is also not wrong still to use R-CHP as a backbone for ongoing studies and as a control arm, in particular in global studies. Now, we could imagine that if pola-CHP was to become a standard, this would complicate the study conduct globally quite a bit because not all the countries are approving it. In fact, it's not approved in the US yet, right? But this lack of overall survival difference really makes it a choice, investigator choice or patient choice to use it, and having R-CHP as a control arm currently in ongoing studies is perfectly acceptable. So in the summary, I think this was extremely interesting meeting because we spent a lot of time on discussing some of the aspects of the design and frontline studies in diffuse B-cell lymphoma. The frontline studies in diffuse B-cell lymphoma had been quite a hot topic for a number of years. Over the last 20 years, we were unable to improve over R-CHP. The glimpse of hope came with POLARIX, and I think it's an important study for that reason. It showed us for the first time that we can actually make a dent in R-CHP and improve progression-free survival. Unfortunately, we didn't see this improvement in overall survival. But nevertheless, I think this should be an option available to our patients. But again, an option and not a standard.